You're listening to Barbell Logic,
the podcast where we talk about what it means to experience strength
and how you can use simple, hard, and effective strategies in training and nutrition to improve your life.
It starts with meeting you where you are right now and finding lasting solutions.
Welcome to the show.
Hello, Andrew Jackson and everybody.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. How's summer going? It's hot as balls.
So far, so good. Yeah, finally starting to warm up. Seems like it was the longest winter ever.
Even living in SoCal, I felt like it was too long. I never thought I would own so many hoodies living in Southern California.
Sweater collection definitely expanded.
I even recently bought a Carhartt hoodie. What? Why do I need all these hoodies? I just want to be living in a bathing suit. So frustrating.
Speaking of clothes and relevant to our topic, it seems lately like clothes are having a hard time containing all of the muscles that you've been building lately.
Thank you for noticing that.
I took a picture yesterday of your jeans you had on with, like some fashionable, holes in the
Yes.
quadricep region. And your leg looked literally like stuffed, like a cased sausage with a hole cut in it. And the sausage is like squirting out from all the gains. What is going on?
Yeah, it's actually been pretty fun. Well, I've been focusing on hypertrophy, which we're actually going to talk about more what that means. But one metric of hypertrophy is that you are bursting out of your clothes. And all of a sudden you're like, I wonder if these yoga pants are too tight, which is something that I haven't asked in a while.
I definitely went through a phase when I first started lifting regularly in my adult life where I was tearing out the crotch. I think if we go back to like my Facebook page in circa 2010, 2011, there were a lot of posts about splitting the seam of my shorts or my pants.
So many blown out crotches.
Yeah. And it's still sort of like a rite of passage when somebody blows out their first pair of lifting shorts.
Totally. It's fun to have that happen again after lifting for so long.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, that's what we're going to be talking about on the podcast today. Welcome to Barbell Logic, Beast Over Burden. I'm your host, Niki Sims.
And I'm the co-host, Andrew Jackson. There we go.
There we go.
3 reps. I'm still learning.
So this comes up a lot. It's a topic that comes up a lot, not frequently when we get a new client. It's in there because hypertrophy means increasing muscle size, which people want to do. I think it's just said in a different way, like wanting to get strong. But after that happens, we hear this ask from our clients like 6 months in, a year in, 2 years in, where it's like, I want to focus on hypertrophy. And I don't think that people often know what that totally means. I think they're looking for a switch in their focus of training. And I thought it'd be fun to explore what hypertrophy means, what it looks like, what it feels like, and how to get there, how to increase muscle size. I think we will also cover why it's important to focus on that after you've gotten strong.
Sure. Yeah, I think what you've just described is a great way to describe the customer experience, if you will. Being the CXO, I would expect you to have that perspective. What I think is emotionally happening often behind those words is somebody who's burned out on hammering the same set and rep schemes for like a first year or 2, sometimes 3 years. They're really in a pretty narrow set of sets and reps because it works.
Yep, they've been doing their 5s.
And it will continue to work even after that first year or 2. But often people are just looking for something different, like you said. I think that the words that come out or the ask is, or frequently it's said, like, I want to move into more of like a maintenance phase is another thing you'll hear thrown out, or a
cut,
hypertrophy phase, or a cut. It's just that they want to do something besides grind on ones, threes, and fives.
Yes.
I think is usually what I see happening with the programs when people start to ask that question. And
Yeah.
the reason I think that's important to clarify is that the ones, threes, and fives have been providing hypertrophy to those individuals. And so it's not that the change is going to now suddenly do what the ones, threes, and fives weren't doing before. I think it's just that they're asking for a little bit more variation in their program.
Yeah. I kind of think sometimes after you've been, grinding your face off, as Matt would say, bone on bone, RP 10, like you get a little, like you get tired of that and you think like, oh, well, hypertrophy looks easy. I just do 3 sets of 10 bicep curls and 3 sets of 10 leg extensions. That seems like a nice break.
Yeah. How's that been for you lately? Pretty
things
easy.
burn. There have been so many pain faces that you've seen, Andrew, where I'm doing this like what's called a drop set, which is just like a huge number of reps and you keep decreasing the weight. And the whole idea is to fail. And you kind of be like, I didn't think I would fail at this light weight, but man, you really feel your muscles just stop working. And it's hard. Like, I think you really have to have enough of a motivation for that programming to actually make the programming work. Because if you don't go to that point, nothing's going to happen. You're not going to get huge. You're not going to get the pump.
That's an absolutely critical point. No matter what rep range you're using, it still has to be stressful enough to drive some sort of an adaptation.
Yeah.
And 5 or fewer reps happens to be pretty convenient for helping people figure out where that is because it takes all out effort pretty much right out of the gate. A heavy set of 5, that first rep even is going to be difficult. And you're going to be wondering whether you're going to get through all set of 5. But I'm curious, as you've been spending more time in the 10, 20, sometimes more than 20 rep range, talk a little bit more about like the difference between doing a heavy 5 RM, which you've done many, and what it takes to get to that same proximity to failure on 10 plus reps.
So I ended up getting into the zone because a lot of the barbell work that I was doing was still triggering some back pain, but I still want to have muscle. That is super important to me. So I was wondering how I can go about doing that. And, there are tons of things you can do, like all these machines that exist. So I started working on machines, and that's different because you're isolating a set of muscles. It's usually single joint as opposed to the barbell lifts that we do that are multi joints and your whole trunk is involved, your spine's involved. On these isolation machines, that's removed. You don't have to worry about balance. Like the movement is really not super skill focused, really. Maybe the belt squat might be the one that has the most skill involved.
Mostly the skill of not chafing the flesh off of your skin with your belt.
Like making my poor yoga pants all fuzzy. And just, side note, if anyone has a good dip belt recommendation, I'll take it for belt squats. But anyway, like the main difference there is you're not so much focused. You don't have to focus so much on like not dying during a back squat. That's a huge focus on a back squat, is having to put everything in the right place to squat down and stand back up with really heavy weight. When I'm doing like a leg press or a leg extension, it's keeping yourself doing another rep. Do another rep. Don't think, do another rep. Don't think, do another rep. And that's different because in a squat, you have to think to some extent. But there's like, if one little position on a squat or on a deadlift comes out, or if you lose that position, you no longer get to create stress. But you really don't have to worry about that as much when you're doing the single joint exercises. You have to get to failure. And it's really about, it's a different kind of mental toughness. You have to, I steal this from Jillian, which is like just thinking of it 1 rep at a time. Just 1 rep, just 1 rep, just 1 rep. Even if you don't think you can do it, you kind of eventually turn your brain off. You have to see what your body can do without your brain thinking about it, which is pretty fun. But yeah, you definitely get to the grind point.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that and take that into account as a coach when I'm thinking about programming the different rep ranges. As I've done this longer and as more and more research comes out suggesting that you can drive hypertrophy or muscle growth with almost any range, the practical constraints and the psychological constraints, physiological constraints start to become the more important variables to manage rather than the exact weight on the bar or the specific number of reps. As long as we're accumulating hard sets, like we talked about, getting close to failure, the rep range can really vary greatly. And I tend to lean more on the 1 to 5 reps with big compound movements to practice, like you said, the skill really of balance with a heavy load and being able to recruit maximal muscle contraction and muster that sort of psychological focus to be able to lift a heavy weight, which is still going to contribute to your ability to build muscle.
Big time.
But then as somebody has developed that skill and built experience with knowing what it's like to push closer to failure, then we can open up more rep ranges and see which ones they're able to do, because that's a different type of skill, especially if you're still using the barbell, the big compound movements. Doing a set of 8 on squats, which is like, again, a legit heavy set of 8, is a different kind of skill.
Yes.
When you start getting into those 6, 7, and 8 reps. And it's a different type of failure. I've been under a heavy set of 8 when I was trying to progress my sets of 8. And I'd be on rep 6. My legs are shaking underneath me, yet I could still keep going. The weight was far enough away from my max capacity that a different type of fatigue can set in that I have to like trick myself to keep going, or to, like you said, keep pushing 1 rep at a time, because what my actual proximity to failure is that I've found is that the higher you go up on the rep range, the more you kind of overestimate your proximity to failure. Like, unless you get to the point where you truly fail on that set of bicep curls, which nice thing about isolation exercises, you can
fail.
Usually actually push yourself to failure
Yeah.
and not suffer a huge like emotional cost. But if you're still using barbell squats on, sets of 8, 10, 12, 15, well, there's a reason that most people don't want to do that, because it's just psychologically takes a huge toll. Skill takes a huge toll to be able to still make it productive. And so you kind of end up, I think, with the big compound movements circling back to that 5 to 8 rep range for the most part.
Yeah.
I don't like to go much past 8 unless I'm talking about an accessory, either unilateral, single joint, or a machine kind of movement.
Yeah. I have a client who's also a coach of mine, Chrissy, doing sets of 10 on high bar squats.
Oof. Well, so what do you notice when she starts getting close to failure on a set of 10?
We haven't gotten there yet. I've started off pretty light because it's a new movement.
Yeah.
She's a wonderful squatter, so good at it, but I want to give her some hypertrophy leg stimulus. And so right after her low bar squat, she switches to a high bar, takes a bunch of weight off, and gets there. So she's kind of pre-fatigued,
right,
air quotes, from the low bar squats. And then she goes into the high bar squat that's a little bit less technical, kind of changes things up a little bit, where I want it to be a weight where she can not have to think as much and just do brain off, squat on.
Right.
And so we're continuing to build that up. So we'll see how it goes.
There's a famous quote from John Bros, weightlifting coach. He said, I don't know why everybody tries to overcomplicate the squat. He prefers the high bar squat. Just put the bar on your shoulders, you sit down, you stand back up. But
after you've been squatting low bar, you're like, oh yeah, that sounds nice.
Yeah. What I see with particularly the squat, but I think this is true for any compound movement, is that getting close to failure will often look like more than just a grind. Your body, in attempt to solve the problem of completing the movement, will start to deviate from the optimal technique or the most efficient technique in order to recruit whatever muscle it takes to stand back up. So, for me, speaking from my personal experience, and I think what I observe from my clients, is the hips start shooting back, because your body's like, okay, quads are toast.
Yeah.
Where can I get more muscle to be able to solve this problem? So, you shoot your hips back. Now your hips can take over, and you'd good morning the squat, or, you get this big kind of hip extension out of it. So that's one of the things I think you also have to be careful with. If you're using compound movements for hypertrophy, particularly in that example, if you're using high bar squats and you're pushing yourself to proximity to failure, but losing the position that is supposed to be stressing the quadriceps and letting the hips take over, it's sort of counterproductive. So I think, you have to take that into account when you're talking about proximity to failure, that it's proximity to failure, not just like, oh my gosh, I can't physically lift this anymore. But if the form breaks down to the point that you're not applying stress to the muscles that you're trying to prioritize with that exercise, it's also that type of proximity to failure, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Which is why like machines become useful at that point, because you're just like kind of stapled in a certain position where you can only use the muscles that you're trying to work on.
Right.
So they have a benefit there. Yeah.
So we often talk about that image of walking into the gym, all these machines. How do you figure out what to do? And we talked about all the criteria that we have that kind of narrows us down to the big four that most of our coaches and most of our clients have experienced. How do you walk into that same gym and you start talking about bringing machines into the equation? How do you pick which machine you want to start using to supplement your hypertrophy training?
I think ones that give you a big range of motion for the muscle group that you want to work on. So I noticed some leg extension machines don't really bend your knee very much, and kind of is like maybe like not a great lockout. Same thing with leg curls. So the machines that seem to give you the biggest range of motion, like lat pull downs are great. Chest supported rows are great. Most of the row machines are pretty dang good. There's that, and we've had this discussion before, but like with the cable row, there's like the little triangle shaped handle where you really can't get as much squeeze in your back. So that's an example of like that handle not being great for when you're really trying to like contract the muscle, meaning bringing the insertion point as close as you can to the origin point. And that's what you can address when you do different variations of bicep curls. I've seen you do like this really crazy looking bicep circuit where you're like leaning forward on a bench, and then then you're sitting back against the bench, and then you're doing like half chin ups, because there are different bicep oranges and insertions. And so you're trying to get to all of them versus something that gives you a bit shorter of a range of motion where you might not be able to work the muscle over that big of a range of motion. So I think range of motion is really, really important.
Yeah, I like range of motion, stability, which is why we're using machines in the first place. Like you said, we're eliminating the balance challenge. The balance problem is intentionally being eliminated so you can use more weight, essentially. And then I totally agree. Varying the position of the muscle that you're targeting is another benefit of using machines. So you can train a muscle in its lengthened position or its shortened position, which is what I'm doing with those different variations. If I'm bending over, my shoulder is in a more flexed position. And so the point at which the curl is harder changes. If I'm just standing, the point that the curl is hardest is when my forearm is 90 degrees from my body. If I lean over, that's going to change the angle that the weight is producing the most force on my bicep. Similarly, if I sit in an incline bench and do spider curls, where my shoulder is in an extended position, now it's an even more lengthened position when it's most difficult. Yeah, those are fun.
Why are they called spider curls? That's cool.
I actually don't know. That's a good question. Maybe because it looks like you're Spider-Man or something. I don't know. But yeah. And what's interesting about that is it starts to even bring in partial range motion. So now I'm going back to kind of like undermining my first point, which I think actually brings into the discussion one of your favorite activities, the hip thrust, where you're potentially in some cases doing a shorter range of motion, but it's allowing you to really load up the movement in a different position.
Because like the end range of motion on that one is like the most important part.
Right.
Like getting your hips into big extension is where it's important.
Right. It's easiest arguably in the most flex position, which is the total opposite of the squat.
Yeah.
Right. The squat, you're in the most lengthened position for the glutes, as an example, you're bent over, the load is heaviest on the hip joint at the bottom, and you're trying to stand up out of the bottom. The hip thrust is the exact opposite. The hardest point is when you're just trying to squeeze that last bit of extension out, which is on the squat, that's the easiest, right? So that to me, I think is another interesting thing about training for hypertrophy is rather than the goal being to lift the most weight over the largest range of motion, it becomes a little bit more of a puzzle to try to piece together those different components and try to see if you can attack the muscle from different angles or make the different parts of the contraction more challenging at different times. And again, just adds in a lot more variation to try different exercises and see which ones you enjoy, which ones you'll keep doing. Kind of like we talked about on the last podcast, the most effective exercises are going to be the ones you do. And I find that some people really love lunges. And honestly, if you're going to pick a glute accessory, I think that's probably one of the best because you're going to be same thing as like a squat in the most lengthened position. Most challenging is going to be in that bottom unilateral leg, lunge position. And you can do it at relatively high reps. So the load's going to be a little bit lighter. It's a great accessory. However, some people absolutely hate lunges. Maybe a hip thrust is going to be better, or maybe some sort of a kickback is going to be better. How do you work with your clients to figure that out, like exercise selection or rep range?
Has a lot to do with what equipment they have. Like working with most of our clients are in a home gym.
Yep.
So that tends to be one of the foremost constraints. And then kind of go from there, what they have available and what they'll do.
Totally.
Because some of it is just kind of annoying and kind of hard. But like chin-ups are a great one. Chin-ups, pull-ups, that stuff works so well. Push-ups, they have an easy curl bar. It's another great way to get like biceps and triceps involved. So mostly what equipment is there and then what they're pursuing aesthetically is another one. Like, do they want big, beefy teardrop legs? Do they want to have some glute expansion doing God's work? Do they want to have really nice looking arms? Do they want to have traps? So like then you start to filter out like, okay, what do you want to see from this pump work? And I think that kind of points you in that direction too.
Such a great point. Like again, practical considerations keep coming back to being the most critical variable to take into account. And there's so much debate and so much argument, so much I need to be the right person about the optimal solution. It just doesn't matter. When practical consideration and the individual response are the two things they're going to have so far outweigh whatever the scientifically proven, citation desperately needed, right way of training, that figuring out what you can practically do and what you personally prefer is always going to be the most important variable. Asterisks, you still got to go hard. You still got to push yourself to that point where you're kind of going into the pain cave.
Yeah.
What kind of problem do you want to solve? Which kind of pain cave do you want to go to? Some people just like the low sets because they don't have to think about it too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Other people want to burn it out.
I'm on this new fun program where I get to do an upper body, lower body split. And one of the upper body days is so effing hard. Like I thought I was going to throw up from like doing back stuff, which is, I don't know if that's ever happened, but it was just like a slaughter. It was awesome. Like I didn't think that I would. I thought like the leg day was going to make me feel that way. And admittedly, one of them did. But no, like that's what it takes. And I think I'm only on like week 4, but I can totally see the differences in it. But like, it's not a workout where it's like, do 3 sets of 10, rest 3 minutes. It's not that. It's do 3 sets of 10, rest, and then do a set of 30, and then do a set of 20, and then go to a similar exercise and do another 80 reps. But it's movements that, don't hurt my joints. It's movements where I can adjust the weight and make it easy to change weights quickly so that I can get to failure really quickly without resting. And I think because I have learned how to work really hard, under the bar, I know that I can continue to work really hard with these weights that aren't barbells. And I think that's, like you've been saying, like, you kind of have to choose violence.
What are the workout durations? Are you still kind of in a similar time window?
Hour to hour and 15. Yeah, maybe one's just a little bit less. So yeah, that's pretty nice.
That's another practical consideration that I think is still a huge influence. A lot of people ask, like, how many sets should I do? And I think it's going to be largely constrained by how much time you have available in the gym and how much energy you can sustain during that time. The longer you train, the less you're going to be able to focus on contracting the muscles, the less productive the stimulus is going to be. And I tend to find that anybody that starts getting into that 10 to 15 rep total set, like heavy set range, that's going to be a good workout.
Yeah.
Even if it's relatively lightweight and you're able to change over quickly, that's a tough day. I noticed that 12 to 15 set range, and in a session, it's probably going to be over an hour and a half, and you don't probably have much gas left in the tank. So, if you're doing 2 to 3 exercises and somewhere between 10 to 15 sets per session and trying to organize your programming so that you hit each muscle group a couple of times per week, somewhere between 2 to 4 times per week.
Yeah.
Again, you start boxing into not having as many options as it might seem.
Yeah. And you do have to limit yourself, or else you'll be there for a really long time. And that's another way to get burnt out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
We started out talking a little bit about the pants. Are there any other like practical outside the gym considerations that you've noticed as you've trained more for hypertrophy?
Yeah, the clothes thing is interesting. Like, I've been pretty comfortable in my size for a long time. And recently I'm like, man, my pants are too small. And I have been like eating more, which was strategic. I chose to eat more protein.
Bulking.
I've been bulking. and now I can see that I've been bulking. And I have to admit, it's just like, okay, so this is what I look like when I've done that. And like, part of me is just like, hell freaking yes, I love this. This feels great. I can do a lot of reps and I feel good in the gym. Then I'm like, but this is tight now. Is that okay? And that opens up the door of, I have this idea that if you feel better and look better naked than you do with your clothes on, it's time to just get different clothes, because your clothes just don't flatter the body that you have at that point. So
interesting.
Yeah. And so I've just been kind of exploring getting different size clothes, which is cool, because now like the parts of my body that I've really been focusing on look better in the clothes that I buy. So that's been kind of fun.
Are we going to freak out all the people that are worried about getting bulky that are listening?
Probably. But it was a choice. It's not going to happen by accident. I'm terrible at trying to be smaller, but I'm pretty good at being bigger. So.
And like you said, this is in the back end of a lot of strength training. And
yeah, I mean, I've been lifting heavy for 10 years. This was not an accident.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't forget about the outside the gym stuff, except for eating a lot of protein and.
Yeah, just taking into account I was going to be curious if you thought the recovery is different. Like if you notice anything from a soreness, other than the fact that you're doing some novel exercises and novel sets and rep ranges, have you noticed any change in fatigue or?
No, I got to be honest. Like, I've been struggling with a back thing for years now, and this is the best my body has felt. It's really nice.
Nice.
Yeah, it's so good.
That's another, I think, huge consideration for which rep range people want to work with. If you've been hitting the 1s, 3s, and 5s a lot and your joints are feeling beat up, or even some of the muscles are feeling kind of beat up, taking a break from the low rep range and heading into that lighter weight, higher rep range can be a huge relief. You get the blood flow going through the area, and it's still going to help you build muscle and strength in the long run. You might not be able to produce the strength with a heavy compound lift immediately after going back to, the heavier or the smaller rep ranges. But in the long run, if you're feeling better and you're building muscle mass, you'll eventually be able to lift more. And in the long run, as we've been focusing on more, I think most people are probably familiar with the training development curve. and that over time you move closer and closer to this asymptotic genetic potential that is early in training, a very steep line that flattens out and very kind of gradually increases over time as you've been training longer. And my mental model for that is that initially you're dealing with mostly neuromuscular skill development, but ultimately the driver of progress is going to be building more muscle mass.
Yep, that's what I want to have.
So all roads kind of eventually lead back to building more muscle mass that you can then learn how to apply to the skill of lifting heavy if you get back into the season of trying to do so.
Well, I think I'm going to leave everybody with something that I said on Instagram recently.
Oh,
I thought was clever. On Instagram, someone asked, how do I qualify for the Theoc membership?
okay. Now we
And
have
I said,
#Theoc.
Theoc.
Okay.
Chasing that Theoc. All right. So here are the questions you have to answer. Are you bringing girth to the earth? Do you challenge the seams of your jeans? Do you choose thick over quick? Do you grab life by the handful? When it comes to rep count, do you choose violence? And when you get to failure, do you say good? This is the way, spelled W-H-E-Y.
That is amazing.
That's your motto for getting bulky.
Hey, so if people want to learn more, where should they go?
I think you should go find some muscle. And the way we can help you do that is by pairing you with a coach if you want a coach to help you on that path. And we have this survey set up on our website where you can fill out questions about your training history and your goals and get matched with a coach who would pair really well with what you're interested in. So it's a fun activity you can do, see who your coach would be. You can read their bio by the time you get to it. So go do that, get matched with a coach. If you want to sign up, that'd be neat too. Then you can actually work towards it. But go do that, barbelllogic.com, and click the find a coach or get matched buttons. They're all over the website. You can't miss them. And if you like this, give us 5 stars. Anything else, Andrew?
I think you got it.
Awesome. Get swole.
Go get jacked, everybody.
See you next time, everybody.